This hearing of the Subcommittee on Immigration, Citizenship, Refugees, Border Security, and International Law will come to order. I'd like to welcome our witnesses, members of the Immigration Subcommittee, and others who've joined us today for the Subcommittee's hearing on the ethical imperative for reform of our immigration system. Today we welcome very important leaders from the faith community who are here to share with us their perspectives on current immigration policy and the need for an overhaul of our nation's system. Faith-based organizations often lead over immigration reform. Over the past decade, faith leaders have often shepherded the often contentious national debate over our immigration system by framing it as a moral and ethical question. The United States Conference of Catholic Bishops was an early leader in bringing faith communities to the table. More recently, organizations and denominations such as the National Association of Evangelicals, the Southern Baptist Convention, and the Liberty Council Legal Ministry have assumed significant leadership on the issue. Creating unprecedented coalitions across the denominations, each of these groups has passed a resolution supporting comprehensive reform that provides for secured borders, immigration laws that meet the economic and family reunification needs of our country, and an earned path to legal status for hardworking immigrants who pay a fine, pass a criminal background check, and learn English. While these groups and I don't always agree on every issue, we do agree on this issue, as do most of the American people. A recent bipartisan survey found that the vast majority of Americans, over 74%, support comprehensive immigration reform that follows the above principles: border security, immigration laws that meet our nation's needs and the needs of our families, and a pathway to legal status for hardworking immigrants. In fact, this poll found that 84% of people who support the Arizona law also support comprehensive immigration reform. Today, we will hear from those to whom we look for moral and ethical guidance about their support for a firm, rational, and just immigration policy. I commend our witnesses' efforts and their leadership. And now I would recognize our minority for an opening statement. I understand from Mr. King that he would like Mr. Smith, the ranking member for the full committee, to offer his opening statement at this time.
Thank you, Madam Chair. A recent Zogby already know. Americans, including the religious faithful, want America's immigration laws enforced. According to the study of likely voters, 54% of Catholics, 61% of Protestants, and 65% of born-again Christians support attrition of illegal immigration through enforcement. I suspect we will hear today that it is somehow immoral or unethical to enforce our nation's laws, and that in fact sometimes we should ignore those laws. For those who want to take this approach, there is just one problem. The Bible contains numerous passages that support the rule of law. The Scriptures clearly indicate that God charges civil authorities with preserving order, protecting citizens, and punishing wrongdoers. A prime passage is Romans 13, "Let every person be subject to governing authorities." On this passage, the late Father Patrick Basio wrote in his book on the immorality of illegal immigration. Clearly, this is advice to Christians to follow the laws of their nation and to respect the laws of other nations. Although Christianity encourages acts of charity, we cannot be both charitable and law breakers. Now consider Leviticus. "When a stranger sojourns with you in your land, you shall not do him wrong." Some claim that the passage mandates we welcome any and all foreigners, even those in our country illegally. But this and other passages do not imply that foreigners should disregard civil laws to enter, or that we should overlook it when they do. For instance, the law for Israel allowed legal distinctions to be drawn between native Jews and resident aliens. The Hebrew term for sojourn, as well as the dictionary definition, means temporary stay. A related term used in some scriptural translations is stranger. So this passage offers no scriptural sanction for allowing millions of illegal immigrants to remain permanently in the United States. Furthermore, in the New Testament, according to the New Westminster Dictionary of the Bible, the word stranger denotes one who is simply unknown, not necessarily a foreigner. Related to the Leviticus citation is the passage about treatment of the least of these my brothers, the hungry, the naked, the stranger, the prisoner. This quote from Matthew plainly advocates individual acts of kindness and does not mandate a public policy. A note in the New Interpreter's Bible says, quote, "It is the individual human beings, not nations as corporate political structures, that stand before the judgment." This suggests little biblical support for anyone's claim to have a right to remain where they have lived illegally or to obtain public benefits, including citizenship. Father Basio takes it a step further, stating, quote, "The Christian Church currently favors an immigration policy that assists those who violate our laws rather than enter the legal process that leads to legal immigration. The Christian Church in some quarters actually recommends to its ministers and priests that they break the law by helping illegal immigrants who break the law. The Church's position disappoints those who play by the rules, placing legal immigrants and businesses that respect our laws at a great disadvantage," end quote. Basio contends that the Christian leadership of this country, not really comprehending the wide-ranging problems connected with illegal immigration, has blessed violating the sovereignty of our nation, depressing the rate of growth of the most violent gangs in America, driving up black unemployment, end quote. A prime example comes from the Wall Street Journal. After a wave of raids by federal immigration agents on Labor Day weekend, a local chicken processing company called Kreider lost 75% of its 900-member workforce. But for local African Americans, the dramatic appearance of federal agents presented an unexpected opportunity. For the first time in years, local officials say, Kreider aggressively sought workers from the area's state-funded employment office, a key avenue for low-skilled workers to find jobs. Of 400 candidates sent to Kreider, most of them black, the plant hired about 200. Basio says rightly that, quote, "Those who build their empires by constructing the world economic order on the foundation of cheap labor are immoral, and their sins cry out to heaven for vengeance. Church leaders, we plead with you to take note of this," end quote. The fact is that Americans need not repent for wanting to uphold the rule of law and provide jobs for legal workers. I agree with Father Basio's sentiment when he said that illegal immigration is not a victimless crime. There are an abundance of real victims whom Christians have the moral obligation to aid and protect. A truly Christian moral approach would be not to acquiesce to illegal immigration, but to work to end it. Our nation has a wonderful tradition of welcoming newcomers. We admit more than 1 million legal immigrants a year, as many as all other nations combined. There is a clear difference, though, between those who play by the rules and come in the right way and those who don't. Madam Chair, before I yield back, let me say that I have another committee markup at which I have an amendment to offer, so I will be gone for some time, but expect to return. And with that, I'll yield back.
The gentleman yields back. Mr. Conyers, I believe, is on his way and wishes to offer an opening statement, but while we await his arrival, I'll recognize the ranking member for his opening statement.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and I want to thank the witnesses in advance for your testimony and for coming forward here today. And it is just, this is very interesting to me. This is a bit of a turn of what normally we see. The folks on my side of the aisle generally are quoting Scripture and talking about our faith and the core of the things that motivate us. People on the other side are saying, well, this really isn't a, sometimes they even into the floor in the Congressional record say this is not a Christian nation. Well, I believe it is. And so let's examine some of that today while we talk about our core values. And it turns out, it might have been reading a copy of the Bible is a little different than what we might hear about today. I didn't realize that Moses was an illegal immigrant, and neither did I realize that King David was an illegal immigrant, or that Mary and Joseph were illegal immigrants. I didn't realize that the Bible barred the enforcement of immigration laws, and neither did I realize that it erased borders, demanded the pathway to citizenship for illegal immigrants, or that the Bible forbid the leaders of a nation from caring most about the well-being of its own citizens. However, the goal of this hearing is apparently to certify the self-evident truth of all of these propositions. Not only must I have been reading a faulty copy of the Bible, but in the land of the Bible, the leaders of today's Israel must have been reading the same copy, because they built border fences to protect their citizens from terrorists and illegal job seekers alike. They deported over 136,000 illegal foreign workers between September of 2002 and May of 2005. That's modern-day Israel. The percentage that was equivalent of that was about 6.5 million removals in the United States had we done the same thing, so over that same period of time. And the law of return applies only to Jews. You know, anything less would certainly result in the annihilation of the whole of the Jewish people that reside today in Israel. And for those reasons, they have their policy, which don't seem to be objected to by the clergy in America, and certainly not by me. I think they have a right for their determination in that phase. But at the base, this concept that animates this hearing appears to be that the only biblically acceptable immigration policy is an open borders policy. You know, never mind the fact that 4 out of every 10 Mexican adults that were surveyed would migrate to the United States if given the opportunity to do so. And that there are 5 billion people on the planet that have a lower gross domestic product per capita income and equivalent standard of living than the people that's out of about 6 billion people on the planet. About 5 billion of them live in a lower standard than the average citizen of Mexico. And never mind the devastating effects illegal and low-skilled immigration in general are having on this country, and especially on our most vulnerable citizens. And I'm pleased that Jim Edwards is here testifying today. He's done much to articulate and write about the real clarity of the issues in the Bible and how it addresses the immigration issues of today and how it applies today. He's pointed out some things that I think he may not have time to say, and so I would reiterate those here. And one is to look back through primarily the Old Testament, but not exclusively. Deuteronomy 32:8, when the Most High gave to the nations their inheritance, when He divided mankind, He fixed the borders of the peoples according to the number of the sons of God. And in Ezekiel 47, details the Promised Land's boundaries. In Numbers 34, it describes the borders the Lord established for each tribe of Israel. Deuteronomy 19 commands against moving a neighboring tribe's boundary stone marking a given tribe of Israel's inheritance in the Promised Land. And Mr. Edwards also writes elsewhere, and St. Paul takes this same issue up in Acts, and as St. Paul addresses the Athenians, he explains that, and I quote, "From one man God made every nation of men, that they should inhabit the whole of the earth, and He determined the time set forth for them and the exact places where they should be." So Mr. Edwards points out, of course, some other issues in the Old and New Testament. One is in Matthew where Jesus says, "Therefore render unto Caesar the things that are Caesar's, and unto God the things that are God's." Mr. Edwards also writes in Timothy that Paul warns that if anyone does not provide for his relatives, and especially for his own family, he has disowned the faith and is worse than an unbeliever. Here it is made plain that we each have a very special obligation to those who are closest to us by family and blood ties, and their needs and welfare must stand tops in our priorities. And what is said here about the local civic community can also be said about the civic community on a larger scale. We as Americans have a greater and more immediate moral obligation to be concerned with the welfare and quality of life in the United States than in other countries. And that's just as the residents of those other countries should be more concerned with what goes on in their countries. Each of us has ties to very peculiaristic communities, and we must all acknowledge the legitimacy of those ties and the special obligation that we all have to direct our immediate attention to the welfare of those very special communities that each of us calls our own. Statesmen and political leaders have a special obligation to look out for the well-being of the political communities that we are entrusted to our care. I just to point out a couple of other points here as I close, and that is my church sponsors an Hispanic congregation in Minnesota. We take up a collection on a regular basis, and that's something that we feel very good about doing. And I've sat down and have many conversations with pastors that are primarily in my district, and the conflict that we have sitting here as the people who have been entrusted to make the laws and the people whose profession and spiritual obligation is to mission to all the peoples of the earth is that our job is to faithfully make the laws and see to it that they are enforced by our executive branch. And I hope you respect that, all of you, and I respect your job and your mission to all peoples on earth. And so with that, and I hope that's the appropriate tone for this hearing today, Madam Chair, and I yield back the balance of my time.
The gentleman's time has expired.